Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we explore the convergence of history and the future, a new era of intelligence.
So I want you to think about the most complex, highly engineered piece of machinery you have ever encountered in your entire life.
Oh, that's a big question.
Right. I mean, maybe your mind immediately goes to like a supercomputer, processing trillions of calculations a second in some refrigerated server room somewhere.
Or maybe you think of the sheer terrifying thrust of a jet engine.
Yeah, exactly. For me, it's always been things like the Mars rover.
Oh, totally.
Like you think about the schematics, the precision, just the sheer audacity of putting something like that together.
Yeah.
Launching it through the vacuum of space and having it navigate an alien landscape millions of miles away. It is staggering what goes into building something that intricate.
It really is.
But now I want you to walk over to a mirror, look at your own reflection, and realize that you are looking at it. You are looking at the ultimate piece of highly engineered, impossibly complex machinery.
It is entirely true, though. We rarely frame it that way.
No, we don't.
We just walk around every day operating this incredibly sophisticated biological vehicle. I mean, you have 37 trillion cells coordinating in real time.
Which is just an unfathomable number.
Right. Electrical impulses are firing across your synapses at hundreds of miles per hour. Your immune system is identifying and destroying microscopic threats while you are, busy deciding what to have for lunch.
Yeah. Should I have the turkey or the ham today? Meanwhile, there's a war going on inside my bloodstream.
Exactly. And most of the time, we don't even give a second thought to the absolute marvel of how this entire system was assembled from scratch.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive.
Yes.
We are exploring the biological and material origins of human beings, but we are doing it through a radically different lens than you might expect.
It's a very different lens.
We are looking at the text of the Quran. And let me be incredibly clear right out of the gate so you know exactly what kind of journey we are taking you on today.
Important disclaimer here.
Yeah, we are not here to read the Quran as if it were a modern 21st century biology textbook trying to pass peer review.
Right.
And we are absolutely not here to take theological sides, endorse religious viewpoints, or get bogged down in those endless debates about modern evolutionary theory versus creationism.
We are taking all external scientific theories, all of those cultural debates, putting them in a box, and setting them aside for a moment.
Setting them completely aside. Because that is the only way to genuinely approach this specific analysis, right?
Exactly. What we are doing today is entirely text analytical. We are looking at the internal logic of the source material providing to us. Our goal is to extract the guiding models this ancient text provides about human creation.
Right.
We want to establish a purely textual framework to understand how this specific document describes the journey of human life. Developing from a state of absolute nothingness into a fully conscious, breathing being.
And I gotta say, I found the methodology in the source notes really refreshing. Well, we aren't talking about historical events today. There is no parting of a sea, no grand battles, no unseen spiritual realms like heaven or hell.
Yeah, no angels or demons today.
Right. We are looking at physical, observable reality. The literal stages of gestation, the physical act of exiting the womb, the inevitable visible process of aging.
And the fascinating part is analyzing how this text takes those observable, mundane biological facts and layers a very specific, uncompromising framework over them.
A framework of ultimate divine agency right over the biology.
Right. It is a profound layering, and it requires a big shift in how we normally read ancient texts.
Definitely.
The text doesn't deny the physical reality of human development. It doesn't say, biology is an illusion, only the spirit matters.
It's not ignoring the science.
Not at all. Rather, it recontextualizes the biology. It takes what you and I might see under a microscope or on an ultrasound monitor and insists on applying a very specific philosophical and theological lens to it.
It forces the reader to look at the everyday mechanics of reproduction and aging and see it as a continuous, deliberate act of a creator.
Yes. But before we can even get into the mechanics of how humans are made, according to this text.
Oh, wait, the vocabulary.
Yes, the vocabulary. I was reviewing the notes on the terms used in these chapters, and I realized we have to establish some ground rules first.
Because the text makes these incredibly precise distinctions between concepts that you and I, in our everyday English, just lazily lump together.
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about how someone got here, we just use the word birth.
Right. We celebrate birthdays. We say someone was born in 1990.
Yeah, but the sources suggest the text sees birth as just a tiny, tiny sliver of a much larger taxonomy.
So in common parlance, birth is the starting line. It's the beginning of the story.
But the source material is deeply analytical. It's almost forensic about the terminology of existence.
Okay, let's break that down.
It breaks the process down into three very distinct Arabic terms.
Yeah.
And honestly, understanding the boundaries between these three terms is the absolute ground rule for everything else we're going to discuss today.
All right, lay them on me.
The first term we need to look at is khalq.
Khalq. Okay, I see that translated here fundamentally as creation, but I imagine it's not a generic word for making something like, oh, I created a sandwich today.
No, it is highly specific. In this textual framework, khalq refers strictly to the initial bringing into existence from raw materials or even from absolute nothingness.
Like the spark.
Yes, it is the foundational act. It is the establishment of the base material where previously there was nothing.
Got it.
For example, the text uses khalq to describe creating the very first human from clay, or creating the initial embryo from a mere drop of fluid. It is the initiation of the physical presence.
Okay, so that is step one. The raw materials are gathered, the foundation is poured, but, a foundation isn't a house.
Exactly.
What is the word for actually building the structure?
That brings us to the second term, nasha.
Nasha.
Yeah. This translates roughly to emergence or development.
Okay.
This is where the text describes the subsequent painstaking stages of growth and building. And it is vital to understand that nasha isn't just the physical assembly of bones and flesh.
What else is it?
It also encompasses the psychological, cognitive, and sensory development that happens alongside it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Nasha is the active, ongoing process of taking that initial khalq, that raw drop of fluid or clay, and structuring it over time into a hypercomplex system.
So we have khalq, the initiation, and nasha, the development.
Right.
Where does birth fit into this? Does it have its own distinct term?
It does. The third term is wilada, which is what we translate as birth.
Okay, wilada.
But here is the critical textual nuance that completely upends how we usually think about it.
I'm ready.
In this framework, wilada is merely the transitional moment of exiting the womb.
Wait, really? Just the exit?
Yes. It is emphatically not the beginning of the human story. It is just a change of location. It's the moment the entity moves from the internal environment to the external environment.
I'm trying to map this onto something we interact with every day. If we were building a piece of software, like an app for a phone.
Okay, I like this.
It sounds to me like khalq is the lead developer sitting down at a blank screen and writing the foundational base code from scratch.
Establishing that the app exists at all, yes.
Right. Then nasha is the software compiling, rendering the user interface, running the updates, integrating the camera and the microphone, turning that raw code into a functional program.
Spot on.
And wilada, birth, is literally just the moment you press the publish button to put it on the App Store.
That captures the textual hierarchy perfectly. Pressing publish isn't the creation of the app.
No.
It is just the moment the public is finally allowed to see it. The actual creation, the heavy lifting, the meticulous development, all of that happened long before that button was ever clicked.
Which raises a big question for me.
What's that?
Why does the text go out of its way to separate the coding, the compiling, and the publishing? Why be so pedantic about it?
Wow.
Why can't the text just say, a baby is born, and let the reader infer the rest? What is the philosophical stake in separating these terms?
The stake is entirely about dismantling human ego.
Ego? How so?
Well, lumping everything under the umbrella of birth completely misses the profound, deliberate journey that happens before that moment.
Okay, I see.
By forcing the reader to differentiate these terms, the text forces you to recognize that the biological assembly line is deeply segmented.
Each specific phase serves a unique existential purpose.
Exactly. If you just focus on wilada, on the exit from the womb, you lose the awe of the khalq, the impossible origin from nothing.
Right.
And you lose the appreciation for the nasha, the meticulous ongoing development.
So we get so obsessed with our arrival that we completely ignore the manufacturing process.
Precisely. The vocabulary itself is a tool designed to show us just how much hidden work went into our existence before we ever saw the light of day.
It is asking the reader to stop taking their own presence for granted.
It absolutely is.
All right, I have my vocabulary locked in. Khalq, nasha, wilada.
Perfect.
Now I want to trace the timeline back to the very beginning. Actually, reviewing the source material, I realized we have to go back to before the beginning.
Oh,
There is a stage in the notes that really threw me for a loop. It's referred to as stage 0.
Stage 0 is perhaps one of the most philosophically challenging concepts presented in the text.
It's intense.
It revolves around a specific verse in Surah Al-Insan, which opens with a rhetorical but incredibly piercing question.
What's the question?
Has there not been over manning a period of time when he was nothing to be mentioned?
Nothing to be mentioned.
Yeah.
That is a haunting string of words. What exactly does the text mean by a period of time? Are we talking about when my parents hadn't met yet? Or are we talking about the formation of the universe?
It encompasses all of that. The text is establishing a profound baseline for the human condition. It is stating unequivocally that human existence is not eternal. There was a void.
A void.
There was a phase of pre-existence where humans literally had no value, no name, no historical footprint, and no presence whatsoever.
Wow.
You weren't a concept waiting in the wings. You weren't a soul floating in some holding area waiting for a body.
You were just nothing.
You were a non-entity.
Yeah.
You were unmentionable because there was literally nothing to mention.
That hits incredibly hard, especially when you think about today's culture.
How do you mean?
Well, if you look around, we are a society obsessed with legacy.
Absolutely.
We are obsessed with leaving our mark, with being somebody. We build monuments. We put our names on hospital wings. We carefully curate our digital footprint so that we are remembered.
Yeah, constant curation.
And this text just calmly taps you on the shoulder and asks, do you remember that eternity that passed before you were born where you didn't matter at all?
It is the ultimate ego check.
Yeah, it really is.
It is an ego check built into the very foundation of the narrative. Before the text even begins to explain how you were physically constructed, it reminds you that you didn't have to be constructed at all.
Right.
Your default state, the baseline of your existence, is non-existence. Everything after that is an active addition.
Okay, so we start in the void. We start as nothing to be mentioned. From that void, the text moves to the actual origin of humanity.
Yes.
But looking through the notes on human origins, I actually got a bit confused here.
Okay, what stood out?
The text seems to present two completely different, almost contradictory origin stories.
Yes. I know what you're talking about.
Right. On one hand, it talks about human beings coming from dirt and clay, but then pages later, it talks about humans being made from a drop of fluid.
Yeah.
So what is going on here? Which one is it?
It is a deliberate duality, and it is a fascinating structural choice in the text. It aggressively separates the origin of the very first human from the origin of the rest of humanity.
Okay, so let's call them origin A and origin B.
Perfect. Origin A applies solely to Adam, the prototype of the human species. The text states unequivocally that this first human was created directly from earth, clay, or dust.
So the prototype is literally formed from the planet.
Yes, the textual model for the first human is heavily reliant on the base elements of the earth.
Raw material.
It is a direct manipulation of raw, inanimate planetary material. Mud, clay, dust. This is the calque for the prototype.
Right.
It is presented as a miraculous singular event where the inanimate becomes animate. But then the text shifts gears completely when it begins to talk about the continuation of the species, the rest of us.
Which brings us to origin B, the progeny.
Right.
The text says the rest of humanity is created from an extract of what it translates as a despised fluid, referring to semen, or the Arabic term nutfa.
Yes.
So we go from majestic clay shaped by divine hands to a bodily fluid.
And we have to ask why. Why emphasize this drastic difference?
Yeah, why not just say everyone is made of stardust or divine light or a spark of cosmic energy?
Because the analysis of the source material suggests that this specific duality is designed to keep humanity profoundly grounded.
It feels like a two-pronged attack on pride.
It is exactly that. Consider the psychology of it. On one hand, it reminds you that your ancestral origin, the grand prototype of your entire species, is literally mere dirt.
You are walking Earth.
There is no celestial pedigree there.
Right.
On the other hand, it reminds you that your individual personal origin isn't even dirt.
Right.
It is a humble, easily discarded, often stigmatized bodily fluid.
The despised fluid.
Exactly. By pairing these two origins, dirt for the species, fluid for the individual, the text builds an inescapable model of extreme humility.
I see how that cuts the legs out from under almost any superiority complex.
Completely.
If I think I am better than someone else because of my lineage, my wealth, or my race, this text forces me to look at my physical origins.
Yes.
I came from a void, my ancestor was mud, and my personal biological journey started as a drop of fluid. Where is the room for arrogance or supremacy in that equation?
There is none. The text levels the playing field entirely. Every king, every conqueror, every billionaire started as a drop of despised fluid,
Originating from a lineage of clay.
and emerging from a state of absolute unmentionability. It is a devastating critique of human hierarchies.
Wow. Okay, so we have established the void of stage 0. We've covered the duality of our origins, grounding ourselves in the humility of clay and fluid.
Yeah.
Now I want to look at what happens after that drop of fluid is established.
Physical development.
Exactly. The text talks about entering what it calls the safe receptacle, referring to the womb.
Right.
And this section of the notes blew my mind because it reads like a masterclass in ancient textual embryology.
We are moving from the deeply philosophical into the highly physical here.
Yeah, it's so detailed.
The source material meticulously maps out the embryonic stages. It presents a sequential biological chain. One of the most prominent places this is outlined is in Surah Al-Mu'minun.
Okay.
The text does not shy away from the biological reality. It embraces it and categorizes it.
I want to walk through these steps because the specificity is just wild for a text of this age.
Let's do it.
First, we start with the nutfer, which is that initial drop of fluid settling into the safe receptacle of the womb.
Right.
What happens next? The text says the fluid transforms into an alaka. The English translation provided here is clinging clot, but the notes say there's more to that word.
Yes, the linguistic root of alaka is fascinating.
Right.
It carries the meaning of something that hangs, suspends, or clings.
Okay.
More specifically, it is often associated with a leech.
A leech. That is a very vivid, almost parasitic image.
Very much so.
Why would an ancient text use a word associated with a leech to describe an embryo?
Because it is biologically accurate to what is actually happening.
Really?
Yes, this stage corresponds to the implantation of the early embryo into the uterine wall.
Oh, wow.
The blastocyst literally has to burrow into the endometrium. It taps into the mother's blood supply. It is quite literally clinging to the wall of the womb, drawing nutrients from its host, much like a leech.
That's crazy.
The text is capturing the microscopic reality of implantation using observable macroscopic metaphors.
That is incredible. So from the nutfa to the alaka, the clinging clot.
Right.
Then we move to the next term, mudga. The translation is a chewed-like lump.
A chewed-like lump, yes.
Imagine a piece of gum you've been chewing for a few minutes. You take it out, it has teeth marks, it has ridges, it's starting to take a vague shape, but it's still fundamentally just a lump of material.
The visual metaphor of the muga is striking. In modern embryology, this corresponds to the somite stage of development.
The somite stage.
Yes. The embryo develops these block-like structures down its back, which will eventually become the vertebrae.
Okay, I can picture that.
If you look at an embryo at this stage under a microscope, those somites visually resemble teeth marks on a chewed piece of substance.
That is totally wild.
The text is using the imagery of a chewed lump to describe the ridges of the developing neural tube.
Mind-blowing. Okay, so from the chewed lump, we hit the next phase, idem. This is where the chewed lump develops into bones. The skeletal structure starts to calcify and form.
Exactly.
And finally, lam. The bones are then clothed with flesh and muscle.
Right.
So you have this incredibly clear progression. Drop of fluid, clinging clot, chewed lump, bones, and then clothing the bones with flesh. It reads like a very methodical industrial assembly line.
It is highly structured. It is presented not as a random biological accident, a happy coincidence of cells bumping into each other, but as a deeply ordered process.
Yeah.
However, this is where we need to stop and look at a hyper-specific detail that the text introduces.
Uh-oh, a twist.
Because this detail profoundly changes the tone of this biological textbook.
Yeah.
It introduces a massive element of vulnerability and reality.
I saw this in the notes and it really stood out to me. Let's go back to the mugga stage, that chewed-like lump we were just talking about.
Okay.
In a different chapter, Surah Al-Hajj, the text, returns to this specific stage and adds a deeply nuanced qualifier.
Yes, it does.
It describes the mugga as being both formed and unformed. The Arabic provided is mukawa wa gahar mukalaka, formed and unformed.
Right.
Why interrupt the assembly line to mention that a lump might be unformed?
When you really synthesize what that phrase means in the raw context of human gestation, it is a revelation.
Tell me more.
The text is seamlessly accounting for the often heartbreaking reality of human reproduction.
Oh.
It is acknowledging that not every pregnancy goes to term. It accounts for miscarriages, for spontaneous abortions, for congenital variations where development simply stops or alters course.
Wow.
By explicitly stating that the embryo can be formed or unformed, It acknowledges that the biological assembly line doesn't always result in a finished, breathing product.
Which is such a deeply compassionate way to frame it.
It really is.
Think about the historical context and, frankly, the modern context. Historically, and even today, a miscarriage is so often internalized as a failure.
A biological mistake.
Right. A woman might feel her body failed her, or that she did something wrong, or that there was a glitch in the laws of nature. It carries immense guilt.
It does. But the text refuses to frame this as a biological mistake. In this textual framework, an unformed embryo is not a glitch in the system.
What is it then?
It is framed as a deliberate demonstration of divine capability. It demonstrates that the ultimate agency overseeing this process has the power to complete a creation, to make it formed, or to halt it, to leave it unformed.
So it shifts the burden completely away from the mother.
Yes.
It is not her failure. It is the creator exercising authority over the timeline of creation.
Exactly. Imagine a family in antiquity or a family today experiencing the devastating grief of pregnancy loss.
It's so common.
This ancient text offers profound theological comfort. It removes the guilt. It removes the terrifying feeling of random, chaotic biological cruelty.
Because it has a purpose.
Right. The text is saying the unformed lump was known. It was categorized. Its halting was part of a broader, deliberate divine decree, not an accident. It integrates the heartbreak of miscarriage directly into the sacred, intended narrative of human creation.
It takes a cold, often brutal biological reality and wraps it in a framework of purpose.
Beautifully said.
But looking at how the text categorizes these biological steps, fluid, clot, lump, bones, it brings us to a massive, dangerous philosophical trap that the source material warns about.
Oh, the trap. Yes.
I know, I fell right into this trap when I first read the sequence. Let's move into how this text demands to be read and the paradigm shift it requires.
The trap is incredibly common, especially for modern readers. When we see a sequence like fluid to clot to lump to bones, our modern post-Enlightenment minds automatically default to the language of natural science.
Right. We default to a mechanistic worldview.
We do.
I mean, that is how we are taught in school. We literally say, the sperm turns into a clot, the clot evolves into a lump, the cells divide to form bones.
Notice the verbs you're using.
Yeah, we use passive or autonomous verbs. We treat the human body like a self-executing program or an automated factory. The raw materials go in, the laws of physics and chemistry take over, and a baby comes out.
But the text violently rejects that reading. The trap is reading these stages purely as independent, autonomous laws of nature.
Okay, so how should we read it?
To explain why this is a trap, the source material uses a brilliant, very clarifying analogy about dancing.
Yes, the dancing analogy, let me lay this out because it really clarifies the tension.
Go for it.
The analogy poses a scenario. If I give you permission to dance in my house, and you dance, did you dance without my will?
Let's break down the components of that. The permission is the environment, the rules of the room. The dancing is the physical action taking place.
Right.
But the action of dancing only happens and can only continue to happen because the will of the person giving permission is actively sustaining that environment.
Okay, I see.
The text is arguing that just because a biological process happens reliably time after time does not mean it is happening independently of a will.
I think I am grasping this. When we look at the actual wording in the Quranic text, it strictly avoids those autonomous verbs we just talked about.
It does.
It doesn't say the clot becomes a lump all by itself.
Okay.
It uses active first-person divine verbs.
First person.
It says, we created the sperm drop into a clinging clot, and we created the clot into a lump, and we created the lump into bones, and we clothed the bones with flesh.
Exactly.
The text inserts the creator as the subject of every single biological verb.
That is the crucial paradigm shift of this entire framework. The text refuses to let you separate the action from the actor.
So Mother Nature's it out.
There is no autonomous, independent entity called Mother Nature operating in the background. There is no blind, self-executing law of biology that God wound up and walked away from.
Right.
What our scientific textbooks call a biological mechanism or a cellular process, this text frames as the continuous, active, and deliberate hand of God.
Wow.
Every cellular division, every folding of tissue, every single heartbeat of that embryo is presented as a direct, real-time divine act.
The analogy that came to my mind when I was reviewing this was the difference between a self-winding clock and a master watchmaker.
Ooh, I like that.
If you have a self-winding clock on a desk, it just ticks on its own. The creator built it, wound the mainspring, and walked away. The clock runs based on the laws of physics.
That is how we usually view biology.
Right. God or nature set up the rules of DNA, hit play at the dawn of time, and walked away to let the program run. But the textual model here is entirely rejecting the self-winding clock.
It absolutely rejects the absentee clockmaker.
It's saying, no, there is a master watchmaker sitting at the desk, looking through a loop, holding a pair of tweezers, actively moving every single gear every single second to make the hands turn.
Beautiful visual.
If the watchmaker stops moving the tweezers, the clock stops.
The text insists on absolute, inescapable divine immanence. The biological steps are just the visible manifestation of the invisible watchmaker's hands.
Yeah.
The laws of nature are just the habits of the creator. If the divine will halts, as we saw with the unformed embryo, the process stops immediately.
Boom. Just stops.
It is a terrifying and yet incredibly intimate paradigm shift. You transition from living in a cold, mechanistic universe to a fiercely intentional one where you're being actively knitted together second by second.
It is a massive perspective shift. But let's pause and look at what the watchmaker has actually built so far.
Okay.
Because once the physical gears are assembled, once the bones are clothed in flesh, the text introduces a completely new, jarring element.
Yes, it does.
We have built a biological organism, but according to the text, we haven't actually created a human yet.
This is a vital distinction in the text timeline. Up until this point, we have been dealing with Kalk and Nasha in the purely physical realm.
The shaping of matter.
Right, of mud, of fluid, clots, and bones. But a pile of bones and flesh, even a living, breathing one with a beating heart, isn't yet a human being in the full existential sense of the word.
The source text highlights a very specific phrase that follows the clothing of bones with flesh. It says, "Then we produced him as another creation." The Arabic is nasha ukra, another creation. Why another creation? Isn't the body finished?
That phrase signals a massive ontological leap. Biology and chemistry can explain the assembly of the flesh and the calcification of the bones. Modern science can track the neural pathways forming.
Sure.
But the text asserts that to bridge the gap between a functioning biological organism and a conscious, intellect-bearing human, a wholly separate, non-material intervention is required.
It can't just be biology anymore.
It cannot emerge simply from complex meat.
The notes connect this concept to verses from Surah Sajda, which explain exactly what this other creation entails. It's not just more cells dividing.
No.
The text says it is the moment the Creator breathed into him of his spirit and subsequently granted hearing, sight, and the heart or intellect. It's the breathing of the soul.
This is a profound dualism at the heart of the text. The physical body is prepared, almost like a beautifully complex vessel, through those meticulous stages in the womb.
The hardware.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But human consciousness, the intellect, the capacity to perceive meaning, to feel empathy, to have moral reasoning, what the text groups under the metaphor of hearing, sight, and the heart. These are not seen as mere byproducts of complex neural networks.
Because they don't just naturally evolve.
No. They are framed as a direct, separate divine insertion. The breath of the soul is what ignites the biological machine with personhood. Without it, you just have the hardware. The soul is the divine operating system.
So we have the hardware built in the womb, the software of the soul is installed, and then the person is published into the world through walada, birth.
Publish.
Right. But the text doesn't stop tracing the timeline there. It tracks the entire arc of life.
It does.
We go from birth to reaching what it calls full physical and mental maturity, the ashud, the absolute peak of your strength. But then it tracks the inevitable decline.
And this decline is treated with the exact same stark, unflinching realism as the embryonic stages were.
It's not sugar-coated.
Not at all. The text doesn't romanticize old age. It doesn't just say, and then you grow old and wise.
Like we see in movies.
Right. It deeply focuses on a specific phase referred to as Arthul al-Ulmer, which translates roughly to the vilest of age or the most decrepit, helpless stage of life.
The vilest of age. That is brutal honesty. I don't think I've ever heard aging described that aggressively in a sacred text. What is it specifically describing?
The source material draws attention to how the text describes the condition of this phase. It explicitly describes it as a state where a person is returned to a condition so that they know nothing after having known.
Know nothing after having known. That is chilling.
It is.
We aren't just talking about bad knees or gray hair. We are talking about cognitive decline. We are talking about dementia, Alzheimer's, the complete loss of physical and mental autonomy.
Exactly. The text is explicitly addressing the tragedy of cognitive decline. It frames the extreme end of life as a mirror reflecting the extreme beginning of life.
Okay, lay that out for you.
You start in the womb knowing absolutely nothing. utterly helpless, reliant on the watchmaker to form you. You emerge, you reach your peak, you acquire knowledge, strength, arrogance, independence. And then the text says you can be stripped of it all, returning to the exact helplessness of infancy, but trapped in an adult body.
It is the ultimate inescapable closure of the loop. You end exactly how you began, helpless.
It is. And we have to ask, why is this dark reality included in this guiding model?
Yeah, why be so morbid?
Because it serves as a final, crushing lesson in human vulnerability. The text is communicating. You were nothing in stage 0. You are a despised fluid. You were built by my acted hands. I breathed the soul into you and gave you a mind to understand the world. And just to prove to you that your mind and your strength are not inherently yours, I can slowly, visibly take them away while your body is still breathing.
Wow.
It shatters the illusion of human independence. It reminds the reader that our intellect, our memory, and our strength are merely leased to us. They're not owned by us.
Man, that is a heavy, heavy reality to process.
It really is.
But it brings us to a fascinating pivot in our deep dive today, because we have been analyzing a text that is ancient.
Thousands of years old.
We are talking about words recorded well over a millennium ago, dealing with clay, fluid, and philosophical voids.
Right.
But the source material for this deep dive does something really interesting. It takes these ancient textual rules, the active divine verbs, the formed and unformed embryo, the safe receptacle, and it applies them to the ethical minefields of 21st century biotechnology.
This is where we see if the guiding models we extracted actually hold up.
Right.
How does a text from antiquity handle dilemmas that the ancients couldn't have possibly imagined in their wildest dreams?
Like at all.
The source material evaluates 2 modern biotech dilemmas using the extracted rules. Let's look at the first one. In vitro fertilization, or IVF.
This is a huge topic.
Huge.
The dilemma seems obvious. The Quranic text explicitly says that God places the seed in a safe receptacle, referring to the natural biological womb.
Yeah.
It is presented as a closed, divinely managed system. So the modern question is, if we step in, extract the egg, extract the sperm, and mix them together in a petri dish under fluorescent lights in a sterile laboratory.
Are we crossing a line?
Yeah. Are we violating that textual rule? Are we performing an unnatural act that usurps the divine process? Are we playing God?
It is a highly logical anxiety to have when reading the text. But based on the internal logic of the text we've established today, the analysis provided in the sources says, no, IVF is not a violation.
Okay, why not?
To understand why, we have to go back to the dancing analogy in the active verbs. The text explicitly states, we settle in the wombs what we will for a specified term.
The key phrase there being what we will.
Precisely. In the process of IVF, human doctors and embryologists are merely manipulating the physical causes.
They're just moving things around.
They are moving the fluid to the egg, they are adjusting the temperature, but humans cannot force the biological fusion to successfully create life. And they certainly cannot force the embryo to implant and thrive once it is transferred back to the womb. The ultimate success, the actual kalk or creation of life, and the settling in the womb remains entirely under divine jurisdiction.
So to use an analogy, it's like a farmer planting seeds.
Good analogy.
The farmer can plow the dirt, plant the seed, apply the fertilizer, and water it. That is manipulating physical causes.
Yes.
But the farmer cannot literally make the seed germinate. Only the rules of biology, or in this textual framework, the active hand of God can make it grow.
That is the exact framing. IVF is viewed as a utilization of the physical laws and materials that God established.
Okay.
It is an attempt to seek healing for the medical condition of infertility, which is encouraged. Because the ultimate power to decree life, or to leave an embryo unformed, still rests with the Creator, IVF is not a usurpation of his role.
Humans are just rearranging the deck chairs. God is still steering the ship.
Exactly. You are moving the raw materials, but the watchmaker still has to turn the gears.
Okay, that makes sense within the framework. It's a comforting thought for those struggling with fertility.
It is.
But what about the second dilemma? Because this one feels much more invasive. Genetic engineering and CRISPR technology.
Yes.
We aren't just moving seeds around anymore. We are opening up the source code and editing the DNA.
We're acting as developers.
We are snipping out genes and replacing them. If God wrote the code, can we edit it?
This requires a very nuanced application of the text. To evaluate genetic editing, the source material returns to the rule of the muga, the chewed lump, being formed and unformed. Mukhalaka wakar mukhalaka.
The miscarriage and anomaly rule. How does an ancient rule about incomplete embryos apply to cutting-edge gene editing?
We have to look at the intent and the target of the editing.
The intent.
If genetic engineering is used to heal a defect, say, utilizing CRISPR to remove a gene that causes a debilitating hereditary disease like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia, it is seen as attempting to fix an anomaly. It is addressing a state of being unformed or incomplete in its health. This aligns perfectly with the broader textual permission and even obligation to seek healing and alleviate human suffering. You are restoring the physical creation to its optimal health.
So therapeutic editing, using CRISPR as a hyper-advanced scalpel for healing, is a green light. You are helping the unformed.
Yes.
But what about enhancement? What if you are a parent listening to this right now, and in 10 years you are offered a genetic menu at a clinic?
The designer baby scenario.
Yeah. You have a perfectly healthy embryo, but you want to edit the DNA so your kid has violet eyes, or is guaranteed to be 7 feet tall, or has a genetically engineered higher IQ baseline. What does the text say about designer babies?
That is where the textual framework draws a hard, uncompromising line. Using this technology for vanity enhancement on an embryo that is already genetically healthy crosses into dangerous, prohibited territory.
Because it's already healthy.
Because a healthy embryo is considered fully formed by divine decree. Mukolika. It is exactly as the Creator intended it to be.
So editing a healthy embryo is essentially looking at the watchmaker and saying, God, you did a decent job with this one, but I can make it better.
Exactly. It crosses the line from seeking permissible healing into arrogant interference.
Hubris.
Complete hubris. It is an attempt to usurp the role of the designer, to alter a perfectly formed divine creation purely for human vanity or societal advantage.
Wow.
It violates the core lesson of humility that the entire text has been trying to build since stage 0. You are taking the despised fluid that was elevated by God and arrogant enough to think you can elevate it further yourself.
It is genuinely fascinating how a subtle distinction between formed and unformed, written centuries before the discovery of DNA, can provide a coherent ethical boundary for CRISPR technology today.
It really is.
Heal the unformed, but do not arrogantly tamper with the formed.
It demonstrates the difference between reading a text as a rigid historical artifact versus reading it as a set of extractable guiding principles. The biology changes, the technology advances at lightning speed, but the ethical and philosophical tension between human agency and divine authority remains exactly the same today as it was 1,000 years ago.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We have gone on an incredible, deeply philosophical journey today.
Quite the journey.
We started in the absolute void, the era of unmentionability where you didn't even exist as a concept to be remembered.
Yeah.
We saw how the text relentlessly grounds us, tying our grand ancestral origin to planetary dirt and our personal origin to a humble, despised fluid, leaving zero room for human arrogance.
Grounding us in reality.
We meticulously tracked the divinely driven assembly line of the womb, from the clinging clot-drawing nutrients to the bones clothed in flesh, finding surprising comfort in the deliberate, compassionate nature of the unformed.
We confronted the paradigm shift of the watchmaker, learning to see past the modern illusion of an autonomous Mother Nature, to recognize the active, real-time hand of a creator sustaining every cellular division.
Right.
We witnessed the bridging of the physical and the spiritual through the breathing of the soul as a completely separate other creation, and we followed the humbling arc of life as it bends back toward the inevitable helplessness of the vilest of age.
The text insists relentlessly that you are not a self-winding clock. You are a masterpiece of continuous, active engineering. Your intellect is leased, your body is sustained, and your existence was intentional.
Beautifully put.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over on your own.
A thought that builds on everything we've discussed today, particularly that mysterious moment of the other creation.
Right. We talked extensively about how the physical assembly of the human body, the bones, the flesh, the neural pathways, is fundamentally separate from the moment of consciousness.
Yes, the dualism.
The text designates a very specific, non-material moment for that. Another creation, the breathing of the human soul. The hardware is biological, but the soul, the consciousness, is a wholly separate divine insertion.
Right.
So here's the question. Look at the world around you. We are rushing headlong into the age of artificial intelligence. We are building increasingly complex, self-learning physical and digital structures.
Neural networks.
Yeah, we are building massive neural networks that are designed to explicitly mimic the synapses of our own brains. But if, according to this ancient framework, true consciousness requires a wholly separate divine insertion of soul to turn a physical form into a conscious being.
That's a profound thought.
Does that mean no matter how advanced our AI becomes, no matter how perfectly it learns to mimic human thought, emotion, and art, it will forever remain just the equivalent of bones and flesh?
Just hardware.
Is it doomed to just be incredibly complex code and hardware? Is true consciousness purely a divine gift that no human code can ever replicate? Or, if we manage to build a complex enough machine, a perfect receptacle, could the watchmaker decide to breathe a soul into that too? Think about the biological machine you saw in the mirror, and then think about the machines we are building.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something truly fascinating. We are going to map out the biological stages of human creation exactly as they are described in the Quranic text. I'll be your host as we trace this really ancient roadmap of the human life cycle, literally going from absolute nothingness all the way to the very end of life. Okay, so let's dive into our unique source material for this. We're actually looking at a highly analytical back-and-forth dialogue between a human researcher named Saeed Mubarak and an advanced AI. They basically teamed up to study the verses concerning the material and biological origins of humans. But they didn't just casually read the text, right? They debated it, categorized it, and rigorously extracted a sequence of events to create a chronological biological map. It's an incredible exercise in textual analysis, and we're going to retrace their exact findings today.
To make sense of this deep dive, our agenda is going to follow their exact chronological map: a Quran-first methodology, origins, the embryonic stages, the another creation, birth, life and death, and finally, the guiding principles.
Starting with Section 1, a Quran-first methodology, setting the rules. The core of their Quran-first approach is essentially this. They agreed right off the bat not to force the text to be a modern medical textbook. The goal absolutely wasn't to take modern science and try to retroactively wedge it into the text. Instead, they let the text speak for itself to extract what they called guiding models. So the science is secondary here. The primary purpose of these biological descriptions is to provide a framework for human understanding and spiritual guidance.
And to achieve this pure reading, they agreed to specifically isolate the active verbs of creation. We're talking about words like khalaqa, meaning to create, jala, meaning to make, and kisa, meaning to clothe. By doing this, they weren't just looking at passive biological milestones. They were tracking the driving force behind the biology, understanding that in this specific text, these stages aren't just independent natural laws happening on their own. They're active, guided transformations.
Moving on to Section 2, Origins, Clay and Fluid, from Nothingness to Form.
So the AI and the researcher point out that the very first phase of humanity is actually the void of non-existence. They cite this first to establish a fundamental baseline. There was a time when the human being simply wasn't a thing at all. It wasn't even mentioned. It is the absolute zero point of the biological timeline. And from there, the text moves into actual material creation. Now, the text draws a really sharp distinction between two different origins. First, you have the original creation of the very first human from foundational elements of the earth, dust and clay. But then, the text shifts gears completely when it talks about the ongoing biological reproduction of human descendants. For our procreation, the text explicitly points to an extracted fluid or a drop. It totally separates that grand original origin story from the physical, everyday reality of how we reproduce today. Which brings us to Section 3, the embryonic stages, a continuous transformation. Drawing heavily from Surah Al-Mu'minun, the researcher and AI mapped out this incredibly strict, step-by-step biological sequence. It starts with the nutfa, the drop of fluid settling in a secure place. Then it actively transforms into an alaka, which translates to a clinging clot. From there, it becomes a mudga, described as a chewed-like lump. Then the text explicitly states the creation of izam, bones. And finally, those bones are clothed with lam, flesh. The chronological rigidity here is just fascinating. It never wavers from this exact sequence.
And this is where the text's incredible linguistic precision really shines.
During their dialogue, the human researcher actually had to stop and correct the AI because it initially skipped over this tiny yet massive detail found in Surah Al-Hajj. The text describes that mudgha, lump stage, as being formed and unformed. Think about that. It mathematically and biologically acknowledges that not every single pregnancy reaches full biological completion. It literally bakes the reality of incomplete development or miscarriage directly into the developmental timeline. Let's look at Section 4, the another creation, beyond the physical. So we have the drop, the clot, the lump, the bones, and the flesh. The structural housing is essentially finished, right? So what happens after the flesh covers the bones? Well, once the physical body is fully constructed in the womb, a really profound shift occurs in the text's language. The text introduces a phase it calls another creation, or nasha ukhra. The researcher and AI note that this marks the breathing of the spirit into the biological vessel. It is no longer just a sequence of physical materials. It transitions into a living, conscious entity. The biology basically becomes humanity. And what's really fascinating here is that this non-material stage actually equips the physical body with the senses required for human consciousness. The text specifically aligns this another creation phase with the granting of hearing, sight, and intellect, or afida. It's kind of like the activation of the biological hardware, turning a physical form into an experiencing, processing, thinking being.
Next up, Section 5, Birth, Life, and Death, the Human Life Cycle.
The timeline maps the post-birth trajectory perfectly, and this is based on verses from Surah Ghafir and Surah Al-Hajj. It's essentially a bell curve of human vitality. We are extracted as a child entirely vulnerable. We then grow to reach our full physical and mental strength. Then, the inevitable decline begins into old age, culminating eventually in death, or what the text specifically calls the frailest age.
The researcher points out this poignant textual reference to cognitive decline. The text describes the frailest age as a time when a person returns to a state of knowing nothing, after having possessed knowledge. It beautifully and frankly tragically mirrors the very beginning of the timeline. It returns the human to a state of early vulnerability, bringing the whole biological journey full circle right before death.
Finally, Section 6, the guiding principles, lessons from the text.
Because the text isn't just a clinical breakdown of biology, the AI and researcher extracted these ultimate guiding models for the reader. By detailing our start from dust and fluid, it demands humility. By highlighting the sudden gift of hearing, sight, and intellect, it asks for gratitude. By mapping the inevitable decline into old age, it prompts reflection on the temporary nature of our physical peak. And through it all, it reinforces acknowledging a divine will actively driving the entire biological process.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. I want you to think about that as you reflect on your own journey from absolute nothingness to a drop of fluid to a conscious being listening to this right now. How does mapping your life through this specific ancient lens change the way you value your temporary physical strength, your consciousness, and your inevitable trajectory? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning, keep learning.